Welcome to another episode of Athlete Things. And today we have Gabby Martinez on the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on, Gabby.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. We're just coming off your second win at USAPL Nationals, 67.5 kilo class. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. This was, I think, the best and highest production of a meet that I've ever done. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was watching it all week. I think that's always the most impressive thing about those competitions is the production. It's like the stream, it's like proper entertainment. I guess like this year with us, going to IPF Worlds, like that was entertainment, like in the flesh in terms of like a professional standpoint with it was really official and all that jazz. But you go on the other side with, USAPL Nats and it was like just pure entertainment with the videography and all of that. How are you feeling after your performance? Obviously, second time taking the win. How's the prep and then how's the day? How'd it pan out for you?
So the day actually did not pan out how we were expecting. I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing because I kind of had it was either going to go one of two ways and it went neither, which is totally fine. It was kind of in the middle, which I'm fine with. The plan was to kind of just go full steam and leave the USAPL with a bang. But after I didn't get my third squat and then it was freezing on bench and I didn't really realize that I was actually cold until after I missed my third bench, which I probably should have had. We probably should have done a lighter third attempt in my, to be honest, but I was like, you know what, it's fine. We're just gonna, my second attempts were already my previous meet PRs. So we
Yeah,
kind of just
awesome.
went for it. And then on deadlift, I was preparing for my game day coach Kyle to walk up and tell me we needed to bump it up in order to secure the dots prize money placing. Because we kind of knew we were going to play whatever we had to play to win. And then it was just kind of like, what do we need for prize money? And he walked up
Yeah.
and he was like, we're actually going to bump it down. We're going to be safe and we're just going to barely get those dots just to get you that prize money. And I was like, oh, okay, so I guess that means no meet PR on the total. But it is my American record already, so I figured it was fine because the goal for the meet was really and truly just to build the resume with another title and then prize money. So that went okay.
Did it almost feel like a bit like anticlimactic then in terms of like your expectations for the day? So like, you're already a little bit behind with the squat and the bench miss, and then you just want to kind of go out with a bang on the deadlift, and then did you feel like you got like held back a little bit in a sense?
Yeah, I was mad. I was really mad after that last deadlift. I was like, man, we should have put 225. It would have been fine. So I actually 2 days later went and maxed out in the training hall. I was a little sore, but I was expecting to be so much more sore. I'm usually super beat up after a raw meet because
Yeah,
typically when I squat, I use a lot of my back. But no, I ended up hitting more on squat, and then I think I hit 220 on deadlift in the training hall. So that would have
true.
given me like a 540 total instead of the 527. But
Damn.
it is what it is.
And that was like 2 days later.
Yeah, I was mad.
True.
We did that, and then we went and we finished watching primetime that day.
Damn, I did not know that. Did you post about that on your social media? I must have missed that.
I think I posted it on my story. I don't know if I posted all of the lifts or not, but I think I posted that I was so mad. And I was so, after I listened to part of the live stream, I was so mad that they were saying I left the door open. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go max out in the training hall. Like, I'm my own coach. I'm saying it's fine. So we're just going to do it. It was super
So
dumb,
Yeah,
but it was
that's
fun.
that's interesting that you bring up self-coaching, right? Because like the rational coach usually, if you're coaching an athlete, you'd be like, oh no, like you're probably too sore. We need to like rebuild things. But it's different when you're self-coaching, right? Like you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I think I made a joke about it on Instagram too. I was like, I asked my coach. She said it was fine. But I also figured if I'm not sore and all of my lifts except for bench had way more in the tank, so I was like, why not? So I ended up matching my bench in the training hall from what I hit on the platform, which I kind of knew going into the meet. But the fact that I even hit and matched my total and hit the exact same numbers as last year, with how training was about 8 weeks out, I'm stoked that I was even able to do that. And the fact that I had more in the tank and was able to put more on it 2 days later, I'm super happy with it. I think it's good momentum for my next couple meets.
yeah, for sure. Because you
Interesting.
had you had a little bit of a back injury, the sciatica.
Well, that comes and goes. I
Yeah.
actually that deadlift that I had posted recently about like my deadlift progression this block,
Yeah.
I just straight up failed 155 keys.
Damn.
It wasn't
I
like
thought that
nothing was
injury
hurting.
related.
It just
Yeah.
no, nothing hurt. It just didn't want to move, and I was so mad. I think I cried in the gym that day. So the fact that I was able to like pull 220 in the training hall 2 days after pulling 217 pretty easily, I was like, I was stoked. So I'm really excited. But the sciatica comes and goes every now and then. It's usually not so much when I'm lifting anymore. It's mostly like sitting at the desk for a long time.
It's that's
Interesting.
momentum for sure. You spoke about momentum before. Like, I definitely think that's a sign, right? Like, you know, not being able to pull 155, hitting 217, and then pulling 220. I guess that's a good sign of things coming up.
Oh yeah, I think I finally figured out how to taper and peak my deadlift, which was the missing piece for quite a while.
Yeah, it's
So good.
interesting as well because I mean, like you self-coaching and then you're finding out that you're pulling more when you max out at, I mean, post meet, right? So there's got to be a little bit of data that you can extrapolate and be like, all right, next one's going to be even better.
Yeah, for sure. Because especially how the Arnold went for me this year, that was not a good meet for me at all. I actually tried a different like peaking strategy for that meet, which is I think more similar to what's more common that I've actually seen, and it did not work because I typically peak a lot earlier than most people, which is a habit that I pulled from my equip days because my body is just so beat up at a certain point in equipment. But yeah, I kind of learned my lesson from the Arnold prep, and then we went right back to what I was doing before well, I guess I went right back to what I was doing before, and it worked pretty well. I think I actually was training a lot lighter than I normally would have, which probably was why I got a little bit more momentum and wasn't as beat up by this meet. So super exciting.
Yeah.
I learned a lot the last couple blocks.
Just real quick, I feel like I'm going through the exact same thing that you're mentioning in terms of like having a lighter prep and feeling that sense of momentum. I think previously I used to just push the dial so hard when it came to peaking because I'm thinking like, all right, if I push hard now, then coach can just taper it and we'll overreach and there'll be this huge super compensation, right? But then there's this like risk and reward when it comes to it, right? Because if something just gets hurt, that's the prep, right? And that's when it gets into rocky waters.
Yeah,
I wanted to dial it all the way back then because now that you're self-coaching, it's a completely different experience to what it was like when you first started. And you've been in this powerlifting game for a super long time, right? So I wanted to bring it back to your original high school coach, Mr. Dwayne Young. I
yeah.
wanted to get a bit of insight into like during those formative years, what were some things that you felt like almost just carries you into today?
I kind of think the way that he approaches lifting is a lot more humble than how, like, the way that powerlifting has kind of gone, which is part of why I'm a referee. And I know it's not super common for higher level athletes to be a referee, but that was something that he was a national referee, I think, until this year or last year. He wasn't able to referee enough national meets, so it expired. But that was something that I always think is really important. I mean, as far as coaching, that wasn't really something that he pushed on me, but it's something that I think he was able to do for me. And so finding athletes that have very similar circumstances when they're starting out now as a coach myself has been really rewarding as well. But the way that he got me into the sport was, I like that story. He kind of walked up to me in the gymnasium one day and just told me, he was like, I think he was joking, but he said, "We're going to stick you in a squat suit. There's a meet here next week." He was like, "You're just going to do it." And I was like, "Okay." And so I went and I did it. And then that was it. I was hooked. And I never thought I would get out of equipment, honestly.
That's, that's such a, I guess, like spontaneous way to get into the sport, right? I mean, like your teacher just pulls you up, hey, jump in this suit, and here we go. And here you are, like 9,
Yeah,
10 years later.
It's very
so
much,
close to 10 years.
it's very much like a movie, right? Like, you know, when you see those movies of like an American football player or something where it's like always like the high school coach, or it's like always like someone like back in the day that just picks them out and goes like, okay, you're going to be great at this, go and do it. Like, let's go, like get under my wing. So I guess that's like having that someone at like such a young age, I guess, have that kind of support and like back you to try something, I can guess be really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And I still talk to him pretty regularly too. I'm actually doing a push-pull meet with him next week. So that'll be fun. I don't think I've actually ever signed up for the same meet as him. So this will be a first. Usually he's either coaching me at it or I'm coaching him at it. So I'm excited.
Man, you guys full circle, huh?
Seriously. Yeah.
I guess then, like, because your coaching journey has evolved. You've had Dwayne Young as your initial coach, and when we did a bit of digging, we also found Ashton Ruska as one of your coaches during your period of time, right? But ultimately, it's led to this point where you are now self-coached. And I guess I wanted to open up this topic because you've also posted on social media that you have been diagnosed as neurodivergent, and there, I guess, comes a sort of there's something at play between self-coaching, being neurodivergent, as to why you'd go down this path, right? So I kind of just wanted to explore that a little bit more. Was there a reason that you eventually just ended up choosing self-coaching?
So I think the original reason why I decided to self-coach was really and truly just because I was in college at the time and I just did not want to pay for the coach that I had. Because he and I were in the same program in college and I was actually 2 years ahead of him. And he's probably one of the most like naturally intuitive coaches I've ever met. But as far as like knowledge based and as far as like what I think my communication needs evolved into changed a little bit. And I kind of knew that, and I wasn't going to be able to expect him to keep up with that either. So I think when I did start self-coaching, it was pretty simple. So I just kind of did what I was normally doing and then just kind of tweaked it as I went. But how I self-coach, I think is very like self-intuitive in a sense. So I change things. I don't like to change a whole lot. And I think that's part of the neurodivergent thing, but it's also that I'm allowed to fixate on certain things in a way that I wouldn't expect another coach to fixate on. So like if I know that a split doesn't feel right and I don't really know how to explain it, but I can kind of figure it out and tweak things from week to week. And then I just kind of find the right recipe because that's kind of how it works. It's just trial and error. But I don't necessarily know how to explain some of those things. And Ashton did give me a program, but I don't know if there was any like back and forth with coaching. He was just telling me to go raw. But I know that when I recently tried to hire a coach because I wanted some help with peaking deadlift and just kind of training strategies, and I did learn a lot from that as far as like actual programming strategies that I still use today. But I think the communication aspect is a lot harder for me than it is for everyone else because I've noticed some of the more educated and more prominent powerlifting coaches in the sphere right now talk a lot about how difficult it is to self-coach and how you can kind of get off track and like it's just harder to keep yourself accountable. And that's just something that I do not experience. I have been almost completely, I think the word might actually be obsessed, but I've been pretty much okay with making powerlifting my entire world. That's where my degree is in. I'm getting a master's degree in a very similar area. I'm a coach. I have a home gym now. Met my partner through lifting. So I think it's something that I'm able to kind of fully put myself into. So when I'm looking at some of these things, it's coming from a more detail-oriented viewpoint that I don't know if I could ever expect somebody else to look at. Because I know exactly what I ate. I know how much sleep I got. I know if it feels right to push a weight this week or if it doesn't feel right. And I always feel like I have a really hard time explaining that to a coach. And it's not necessarily their fault that I have a hard time explaining that, if that makes sense.
I guess there's two really big keys and positives I'm guessing taking from that, right? And that would be that your self-awareness of your own body and your own programming and what you respond to is like you're really in tune with. And then I guess what you said before in terms of like building your life around powerlifting, like almost using this kind of obsession or like wanting to have things, set in the right place as like a really powerful tool because it's consistency, right? And consistency at the end of the day is what's going to produce long-term results over and over and over again. I guess like a big question I would have is in terms of like, like trusting the process, like and adjusting to when you feel like you have a hunch that things aren't going well, where do you kind of draw a line in terms of, do you have someone that you can kind of lean on for further advice? Do you kind of go straight down the like numbers route and look at data? Like, how do you kind of assess, I guess, when things are going well and when things need to be changed?
So I think most of the time I kind of just brainstorm off of my partner, Mikey. And then I brainstormed with my previous coach as well. It was just kind of like me talking to a sounding board, because by the time I finished my train of thought, I had already kind of decided. But for the most part, if things aren't going well, it's because I changed something. So I usually just revert back. And then if that doesn't work, it's usually a numbers game for the most part. But I haven't even changed my split much since I first started. Because I think my first actual like consistent training program wasn't until I started college. And that was like squat on Sunday, bench on Tuesday, deadlift on Thursday. And I still kind of follow the same split basically. It's I've adjusted it and switched it a little bit over the years, but I find that it's just more comfortable and I get more consistent progress if I just keep that the same.
Yeah, I can relate to that for
Interesting.
sure. I remember like for years, because I've been powerlifting for like 8 or so years now, and I think for years it was like, okay, you know, I've got deadlifts on Tuesday, I'm squatting on Saturday, I've got, you know, bench on this day, I do this accessories on this day. And it was very much like when that fell out of place, or like when I couldn't do like that certain program on that day, I would feel like out of whack. Something wouldn't feel right. So I can definitely relate to that sense of like, you know, having that routine and that split in terms of, you know, XYZ on this day, this day, this day, and you just stick to it.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time actually sticking with 4 times a week. When I hired my most recent coach, they were like, there's no way that you've gotten to this level only training 3 times a week. And I'm like,
So
I never
you've
had
increased
time to
today.
do 4 days. Well, I'm trying.
Yeah, right.
I think my first week of this block, I didn't do my 4th day, but I did it this week. So
Damn, so you're a 3-day weeker.
I think I need to bump it up. So 4 days, I need to get it to 4 days consistently. And then once I hit that, I think 5 days is probably going to be my golden spot. I think at the 10-year mark is at the point where you need to start deciding if it's 4 or 5 days. So I need to get 4 days down.
Probably for bench, right? In terms of 4 days frequency, like you'd think like the squat and deadlift, you can get away with 3. With bench, in terms of increasing volume over time, you'd probably look at that 4th day as a bit of not a must, but, you know, it makes it easier.
Oh yeah, especially with bench depth. I'm having so many different angles with my camera right now trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Is this the first time that you're kind of going through that figuring out stage with bench technique?
I think my bench has probably changed the most. Same thing with squat. So I think bench and squat have always been limited by the mobility that I currently have. So the bar sits on my back as low as my mobility will go on squat when I do low bar. And on bench, because I was an equipped lifter, like I tuck my elbows way more than normal. And I do have like this nagging ache in my elbow. I think it's actually like tennis elbow, which I'm almost positive is from an equipment injury. I'm not even gonna lie, I don't know though. But so bench frequency has been something that I've had a hard time finding a golden spot. So bench depth is actually like, that's the point where it aggravates that injury. So I need to figure out a way to not aggravate that, so that I think I'll be okay as far as like keeping my bench consistent, but it's kind of pushing that 125. I'm gonna be really angry if I don't hit 125 next year, with or without bench depth.
It's all right. You got a training hall to hit it after 2 days later.
That's true. I think training halls should be standard at all meets now.
I think I want to take it back because there was a lot to unpack from what we were talking about previously. One aspect that you mentioned was like the communication, I guess, not meeting up to standard, I guess, with how quick you need a certain type of response, or how quick you're, I guess, interpreting data from yourself, right? Because I think from what I'm understanding is, as you're taking in a lot of data, there's like, I guess, a lag between you and the coach. So I guess for you, like when you are looking at data, what kind of things are you looking at? And do you feel like you take a more rational perspective on it, or it's completely intuitive. And I mean, you know your routine's out of whack, so therefore you can kind of make these correlations. Like how do things work in your mind to, I guess, keep planning training moving forward?
So I think I actually plan out when I'm writing my program. I think I actually write out the program with specific numbers in mind, especially prep. So like prep, I'm gonna have to like mentally remind myself that it is okay if I don't hit the number that I subconsciously have chosen. And I think that's why when I had these issues with that lag in feedback from coaches, because if your last warm up doesn't feel exactly how you expect, you're like, what does that mean? Like I don't know if necessarily that means I need to go down or should I just go ahead and take it, and maybe it was just like a technique thing, or like if it was technique, what was it? So now that I'm a little older and I've been self-coaching for a lot longer, it's a lot easier to look at just film and look at it, but I do need to have like some kind of number. And I typically plan the jumps from week to week, especially in prep. When it's off season, it's a little bit different, but I do still stress out a lot about the jumps that I make week to week, because I don't like to have a really big jump from one week and then I have to go back a little bit because I didn't necessarily overshoot, but I felt a lot better that one week from extra sleep or whatever it is. So regardless of how things feel week to week, it's kind of more so about like a steady progression, because if I get ahead of myself too early, it always ends up jeopardizing the end of the block, and then it either messes with my confidence in the following block, or I end up overreaching a lot and then there's some kind of ache or something that pops up, and then it's just never a good cycle. So I tend to have pretty numbers focused, and then intuitively I will adjust up or down just a little bit. But for the most part, I try to keep everything like that slower, steady progression.
Yeah, I think like I mentioned earlier, I'm relating a lot to what you're saying, right? Because like right now, I feel really good in training. Like momentum is there, but there's been so many times where it's like I've pushed it way too early, and then the rest of the prep's kind of a bit rough. So it's like this is the first time where I'm just trusting the pacing that I've placed upon myself, and just like going with that regardless of if it feels better than expected or worse than expected. And yeah, I think having like some sort of structure imposed is definitely helpful, whether it's coming from a coach or whether you're putting it on yourself, right? But I think it's very valuable how you're able to intuitively tell, I guess, how you're feeling as quickly as possible, right? Because I think one of the limitations, and it's always going to be a limitation, whether it's like face-to-face coaching or remote coaching, is like I said, you know how you feel, and then you need to communicate it to a coach, and then they'll kind of make that decision for you. So I guess the more time that you accumulate, like being self-coached or just having like trading intelligence, it'll help you make those, I guess, smarter decisions moving forward every single time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I had a hard time with the programming that I did over the last few months before I got into prep for Raw Nationals, because it was a strategy that I wasn't familiar with. And I've done kind of like the same, like you have a top set and then you have drop sets, and the rep scheme doesn't change through the entire block, especially for that top set, even if drop set rep scheme kind of reduces as you taper. And the fact that RPE wasn't like a linear, you start at like a certain RPE, you finish at a 9, then you deload. Like the fact that that changed, I don't know what that did to my brain, but like I could not jump from an RPE 6 to an RPE 8 down to like I just could not do it. And I think it might have just been because I'm so used to that linear progression that just like doing like a test angle in the middle of a block, like that was just like, what am I doing? Like this is not meet day. And I knew why, and it made sense why they programmed it that way. But like my brain was just like, this isn't right. Like something's wrong. Like, and everything, like I don't know. It just messed with me. I don't know how people can do singles year round. That would mess with me so much.
Do you feel like a lot of that stems from, I guess, maybe, for lack of a better term, like the old school powerlifting approach that you might have had through like high school and college in terms of like, especially equipped lifting? Like I'm guessing it was very much like that linear percentage-based programming. And then I guess, from such a young age, that's all you're taking in. So you're always going to have that bias towards that style of programming. And then on the flip side, you start delving into like RP and you kind of realize that, 1 week you could be outperforming the week prior, and then the next week you could take a little dip. So do you feel like you kind of struggle with the natural ebbs and flows now of like powerlifting progress and progression?
I don't know if I could ever get on board with an RPE fluctuation like that. I think the RPE, because I do tend to repeat certain RPEs through a block, but I don't ever go up and down through a block unless it's a deload at the very end. I mean, the way that high school programming was done for us was, I don't even know if we had a program, if I'm being honest. I know a lot of my teammates at the time, like they were eating like Skittles and like goldfish during the period, and I was just trying to get in my squat suit just to make sure it fit. And I remember failing a lot of lifts in high school too. Like I think we just maxed out every day, if I'm being honest. We had like very little guidance in high school. I was just super stoked that like we were in a weight room by ourselves, which was fun. And then in college, I think it was very much so percentage based. But I know in equipment, things vary so much more because your equipment doesn't fit right one day.
Yeah.
Then you lose weight and your equipment's too loose and you're freaking out, or the person's not there to wrap you that you normally have, or like it just takes you too long to get into your squat suit. Because that happened to me quite a bit, where I was only able to get in like 2 warm-up sets, and then my legs were so swollen that I just had to get out of it, which probably helped that I got out of equipment and went raw, just because I think I struggled a lot with equipment, more so than most people. I remember in college, they were trying to get me into like a bench shirt that quote unquote fit. But I just had a panic attack. I had like, it was like over my head and like the sleeves, like it was just over my face and I couldn't move. And I was just like running around the gym and I was like, take it off. So I think I had a harder time with that than some of the other people. So the fact that I stumbled into raw, and I only even went raw because my competition equipped at the time signed up for collegiate raw. And I was so mad. I was like, are you running from me? So I went raw and I did raw nationals in 2021, but I don't even think she did raw nationals that year.
Is that person still competing?
I competed with her in my weight class this year.
Oh, true. So it's been that long, just up against each other that whole time. That's sick. Are you mad?
Equipment to raw. I think if she hadn't done that, I don't know if I would have gone raw. So I do have to give her some credit for that.
Yeah, shout out. Who's that, if you don't mind me asking?
Cassandra Carlton.
Ah, shout out. Got Gabby into raw.
I wanted her, was it her equipped junior squat record, her world record? I wanted it so bad. And then 2020 happened, so I didn't get to qualify.
Damn. Yeah. We want to like, I guess, just to really quick explore like the equipped versus raw. What are some takeaways, I guess, you've been able to take from equipment now to raw? Do you feel like a big positive is that you're so used to having a heavier squat on your back, a heavier bench in your hands? Like, does that play a large factor in terms of confidence when you're lifting raw, knowing that you've had X amount on your back before?
Absolutely. Like the goal right now for my squat is to hit a 210 squat raw, because that was the first equipped squat that I ever hit in a national level meet in equipment. So if I can do that with squat, which I never thought I would be able to touch raw, then all of the other ones that I've already hit, I think deadlift is probably the next one to go. The bench one is going to take a minute because I think my best bench in equipment is 145, and my best squat I think is 242. So I don't necessarily need to hit my best ever squat, but I do want to hit that first squat that I ever hit. Bench will come when it comes. If Jen Thompson can do it, I will be in the game for quite a long time. So I'm sure that will come eventually. And then that deadlift that I hit, that 220.5, that was that one will be next. I don't know if it'll be this meet, but hopefully next year. Hopefully I'll get to load it next year.
Just on that,
I'm curious.
Oh, you go.
Sorry, you go.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I'm curious because you mentioned like you've got like all these little aching pains that come from equipped back in the day as well. You're coming from a perspective where you've got both points of view, right? So I guess like in terms of an injury perspective, where do you kind of see like where's the prevalence of injury coming from both? Because like you could argue the squat suit's kind of there doing most of the work, and as well as the knee wraps, but there's still going to be some sort of effect that's going to be lasting on the body when you are touching those loads, right? Because it's different having your muscles and tendons be ready for it compared to equipped.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the overload itself is what causes a lot of the injuries. And especially in people that don't have that strong of a core, like if you don't have a strong core and equipment, you are not going to be able to do one, what you're capable of, and two, what the suit will allow you to do. So I think the elbow issue that I have on and off now that comes up primarily with bench was actually from equipped squat. Because it is terrifying to do a low bar squat in equipment because that squat suit is so slick. And I always had a really hard time trusting that it wouldn't just slide off my back and like break my forearm with it. But I do know that like this, yeah, that was something that actually happened at one of the meets in high school. So I didn't see it, but I was there when it happened. So yeah, I'm terrified of back squatting with equipment. I'm definitely a high bar girl if I ever get back in it, which I don't think will happen. But yeah, so like that wasn't actually why I decided to do the thumb over grip on squat, because beforehand my thumb was always around the bar. And I think injuries when I was in college, like they were expected. Like if you are pushing yourself, like you should have some kind of injury going on. Everyone had injuries, which is part of why I'm not the biggest fan of equipment. I don't know if that was just the culture for my college or if that's like an actual overall like equipped like cultural thing that you just expect to have these kinds of injuries, because I don't think if I had been in equipment, I would have had that same kind of overload and I wouldn't have been like struggling so hard to like keep the bar on my back, that I would have had the same injuries. It was mostly just because like my my shoulders and all of that are super stiff. So the fact that I was trying to force low bar in a suit, I think is kind of what overdid it. So it pops up every now and then, and it usually just affects bench. But I know even in the bench, like a lot of people had like collarbone issues and like the backs of their shoulders were always really tight. And then deadlift, it was always somebody's neck or their back or something like that. But that was like after an equip session in the fall at UTSA, like it was really common. Like people needed a massage gun because things were so tight. Like I had to get out of a bench shirt a couple of times because I was crying because my forearms just would not cooperate. So I don't know if that's like, I appreciate what equipment does, and I think it's a skill. It's one of the skill parts of powerlifting that I do enjoy watching every now and then, but every time I watch it, I do still kind of think about all of the injuries that were just normal, which I do appreciate raw that like, I mean, injuries definitely happen raw, but it's usually just from like, it's usually on squat too. I was looking at some of the live stream footage from this past meet, and it's usually squat, which is, I think that would be just as scary in equipment. As also, it's really, really scary to spot and load equipment too. So I do love equipment, but it is one of those, like, if you want to watch a show, that's probably the meet you want to go
to. Yeah, there's
yeah, imagine like I was gonna say like everyone just says equipment hurts. And I guess you could split it into two kinds of hurt. Like you've got the actual like knee wrap and the squat suit just constricting the muscle. And then there's, I guess, all these lasting effects that you're mentioning that we haven't really spoken about on athlete things, because most people come from like a raw background. So hearing this is like, shit, equip people are built different.
He's certainly selling it well.
I wonder if it was just my school or like if that's like a nationwide. I think it's mostly because UTSA was so competitive in equipment that they were trying to get us in suits that were like the smallest possible size to get as many kilos out as possible. So when I'm coaching equipped kids, that is not what I teach. You know, you want something that's comfortable that you can get pop out of, but you don't, if it's hurting you, then I don't think it's worth it.
Well, especially like at a young age, right? Like you spoke before, like in high school, you know, just lifting heavy, and also in college too. But I imagine like, you know, when you said overload, yes, equipment, you know, you're able to lift a lot more than what your body is, you know, capable of to a degree. And it's just purely that technique of shifting the load. I guess like at a young age, then, you know, when you're overloading that much and like you're just pushing through those little niggles, I'm guessing some of like that elbow pain and stuff that you're still having now is just that washover effect from all those years back when you started, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was something that was like constant. So it wasn't even during the session. It would follow me throughout my entire day. And I still have a hard time, like, I don't know if it's from wrapping knees or if it was from like pulling down on the squat. I don't actually know what the injury was, but it is constant. So when it flares up, I have a really hard time getting it to go away too. And I had a few theories about what it actually was, and it was really common in at my college that a lot of people had like the same elbow pain. And I think it was from the way that we were squatting and holding the bar on our backs, and then when we would bench, that's when it would actually like flare up and like actively hurt, not just
and then wrapping too, right? Like just like holding that tension in your forearms, trying to wrap knees really tight over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, coaching equipment is a whole other beast.
It's almost like
Whole
a
other
job,
beast.
right? Like being a rapper, like professional rapper. Strapper?
We did
Rapper.
actually have one in a couple meets. Like
Really?
we had an assembly line. Yeah, his name's Caleb. He was a national champion, and then he graduated, and then we kept him around because he was pretty good at rapping.
True.
It tears your forearms up though. Like you can't do it forever. So it's hard.
I'm curious what that does then for your current like raw career, right? Because like you have these niggles and pains that come up pretty often and you can predict it. But nevertheless, it's going to affect the way that you kind of have to like get your training in, right? So I guess there's like a mental aspect to the injury, but also like how you kind of adjust it when it does start to flare up.
So I think the biggest difference between my raw training now and my equip training when those same injuries kind of flare up, or they're not necessarily injuries, but like when those aches start to affect training, I do not push through it. So like in equipment, I would do a set immediately, like start crying, pop a Tylenol, do another set. Because you had to get that training in. Because in equipment, like you only have so much time that you can stand to be in the equipment. You only have so much time that people are around to help you. So you got to get out of it what you got to get out of it. And that makes equip training just so much more unpredictable. And it's actually really hard to program and coach for. And with raw training, because, I think the way that I think about raw training, it's just so much easier. So if things are hurting, it's so much easier to just take weight off. Because it's not like when you're in a squat suit where you're not going to be able to hit depth and you are not going to be able to do what you're supposed to do. You just take weight off and you can do the exact same thing and you can work on a different type of stimulus. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of force those contractions versus just loading more weight on and trying to get contractions out that way. But also like warming up is something that I did, I think, probably way too much when I was in equipment because I was afraid of those injuries, and it probably ended up exacerbating a few of them, if I'm being honest. But I didn't have as much knowledge then either, so I was probably doing the incorrect warm-ups, if that makes sense. So I think now with raw, and especially with all of the people that I have access to ask questions and to make sure that, if I have an injury, if it makes sense to do this warm up beforehand, or if it would make sense to use it as like an accessory afterwards instead, that's helped a lot. But with raw training, it's just so much easier to slow down and to actually be able to adjust.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, okay, that means the only limitation then is just your ego, right? So like when pain does start to come up, I guess as raw lifters and even myself, I fall into the habit of being like, okay, maybe if I get this one more session and even if I'm in pain, then it'll like I'll still get some sort of taper effect or whatever, rather than like acknowledging that there's pain present and just reducing load. Even though
And
it's
I
a
think that's
legitimate
something.
stimulus.
That's true too. Yeah, but I've had a lot of conversations, I think, with Claire about that. So like when you have pain, like it zaps like some of like the intensity that you want to be able to bring, especially if you're in a prep. But if you don't address it, then you're not going to get the end result that you want anyway. Which I think is exactly what I did for prep leading into nationals. And it wasn't necessarily pain, but nothing felt good. Nothing felt like it was supposed to feel. Nothing felt strong until like the last 2 weeks of prep. So I have no idea what changed necessarily because I really wasn't focused on all of the little changes. I was just trying to make sure that we had like an actual plan. So we were just going to take whatever we needed. And I was expecting way more aches and pains during prep, but I think because I took the approach of, just go nice and slow, that helped prevent some of the injuries, and it made it a lot easier to actually show up on meet day and have way more in the tank than I was prepared for.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I guess then like only other thing is your commitment to the plan. Because then as a self-coach, like I imagine when those flare-ups do start to happen, you could quickly make these adjustments that are based out of like irrational decision making, right? Whereas, I mean, if you've experienced it over and over and over again, you're kind of like, oh, I'm used to this. So you can kind of just ride the wave until things start feeling better, like you said, that 2 week out mark, and then things just, for some reason, just start feeling better, and you can't really put a pin on it.
Yeah, I think sometimes when I don't actually like, so you mentioned the ego thing. So I think mine's not necessarily ego focused. I think it's more so like I'm terrified of not living up to whatever expectation that, you know, meet directors had when they put me on a graphic, or the sponsors that I have, you know, when they're making their graphics, or the expectations that I have when I sign up for a meet, especially with like formula being such a big thing in the USAPL. I had such a hard time like wrapping my mind around that and just like focusing on training. So what I did for Raw Nationals was I kind of told myself, like, we don't care about dots. Like, the formula is the formula. Like, you're not going to try to manipulate your weight. You are just going to make weight, and you are just going to show up with what you have. And we'll, you know, I just need to figure out and see what's actually going to happen on the day, because that's also why I hired a game day coach. That's the first time that I've ever actually hired one. And I wrote the plan. I put my attempt sheet. I was like, these are the conservative ones. Like, if you got to adjust it, like, all you, because I had known Kyle for I think a few years. So I was like, you make good decisions. I was like, it's up to you. But the expectations I have, especially for like the Arnold, both of the Arnolds that I did, I think the first one was worse because I didn't know what to expect. The second Arnold, I think there was the expectations, and then when I got there, there was just so much that I was not prepared for, with it being in C-Pod versus on the floor. Like, it was so small, and I actually had to chill in the hallway, like in a corner in a chair next to a water fountain, because it was too much. So the Arnold was cool, but I don't know if I need to put a request in for like it not to be that loud, or for them to not use as much bass, or what. But I invested in several pairs of earplugs after that one. And I contemplated taking some sunglasses, but I didn't want to step on Sean's toes with that one.
Yeah, some pit vipers.
I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? No, that's not my vibe.
It's obviously like, you know, talking about experience, you know, with USAPL and like the bright lights and the heavy music, you know, now I guess we can look at what's next for you, transitioning to PLA, where, you know, you're going to have that different experience, I guess, in terms of not as much dots focus. You know, you're going to head to nationals, you're just going to have a straight up battle. And then whatever happens there moving forward into worlds, it's a similar situation, right? Where it's just you weigh in and it's more about total, and then, you know, lining up equal body weight too. I just want to delve into a bit more in terms of what's next for you in terms of that PLA switch, in terms of your goals and like what you want to cement over the next few years making that switch. And then also, I guess, you know, when the split originally happened a few years ago, whether or not that was something that affected you, and like if worlds was always the goal, and then that split happened, and then that kind of took a bit of a hit in terms of your training.
So I think international competition is something that I have always, like, from the beginning of my athletic career in like t-ball, and when I did softball and gymnastics, like, I have always wanted to compete internationally. Whether or not I was good enough, I don't think ever entered my mind. I was just like, I'm going to figure out how to get there. Especially with softball, I think softball was probably the main fixation that I had before I found powerlifting. And I actually quit softball in high school to do powerlifting, which in hindsight was a little bit insane. So when the split initially happened, in my head, I was like, naturally, I'm going to go chase the international competition. But for me, I think there's so much that goes around that decision, and I am still kind of having a hard time with the fact that I want to go and chase the IPF, because I have so many people that are important to me that are heavily involved with the USAPL. And I think for the last year at least, if I had made that switch, it would have felt like I was being not only disrespectful to them, but I also didn't want to potentially disappoint those people. So before I officially like told anybody like, yes, I'm going to sign up for a PA meet, I actually had to have a conversation with one of those people. And I was like, I need to let you know before I tell anybody else, because, if this one person is disappointed in me with how involved they are within the USAPL, I wouldn't be able to do it. And it naturally, they're involved with the USAPL. They've won several world titles themselves. So they were like, we understand. That's fine. Go do it. But I had a really hard time with that. And I don't think if I had talked to them, I don't know if I would have actually done it. But also the fact that I am a coach and most of my athletes are in the USAPL. That is something I am still really having a hard time with, because it feels like quite literally the most selfish decision that I think I could make in my adult life at this point, as far as powerlifting goes. But I think I have to do it. I know that there will be such a heavy sentiment of resent, and I don't necessarily know where that would be targeted. But it kind of seems like it's targeting the USAPL just in general, especially with some of the current decisions that they're making by pushing, world records. If we wanted world records, we would have gone to the IPF. So now that I think that they're bringing that up, I think that's part of why there is a few of us switching, because it makes sense. Like, that is something that we want, but we want it to be legitimate and not just because there's kind of a gap and those haven't been said yet. So I'm really excited. There's a couple of showdowns that I'm really excited to go down into nationals next March, I think it is. So I haven't competed with Kristen Dunsmore since 2021.
Yes,
nationals.
of course.
So I'm super excited for that one. And I do really admire Chelsea, so I'm going to have to see if I can outbench her, because that is her, she's won gold in the bench for, I think, 2 years at IPF Worlds. So I'm super excited. It's going to be a pretty stacked weight class.
Yeah, for sure. You got a bunch of battles there coming March. That's really exciting. Actually, just thinking about it. Forgot about Kristen. I forgot what I was going to say. Damn, I just lost my train of thought. You go, Danny.
I think we were thinking about once you get to Worlds, right? Like the potential matchups there, but we didn't seem to think about that there's head-to-head battles that you need to face off there on the platform in PLA first before you even go to Worlds.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of bummed that Claire went up to 76. That would have been like the show, I think, at nationals. It would have been me, Claire, Chelsea, and Kristen. That would have been nuts.
I just got my train of thought back. What I was going to say is, following like that USAPL Nats this year, there was all that chat in terms of, comparing performances at IPF Worlds and what the athletes at USAPL Nats can do on the world stage. When you got off the platform and, you hit that 527, was there any kind of direct comparison to like this year's results in Malta? And were you already eyeing off some of those international competitors, or are you just more straight up thinking about March 1st and that stacked class that you've got ahead of you?
So I compare, I think, pretty much everything that I do in the gym with what my international competition is doing in the gym as well.
Yep.
Which I know is probably not what I would want my athletes to listen to. And it's not something that I compete with. So it's not something like, oh, they hit this, so I need to hit this next day. It's more so like I'm trying to figure out how they're training, just to kind of see if that lets me know anything later, which probably isn't that helpful in this kind of sport, because I think when I don't put as much pressure on myself, that's kind of where the magic starts to come out. But hitting that 527 kind of made me angry, because I was anticipating closer to like a 540, 545 total, which still technically wouldn't put me where I need to be. But it was kind of like the last few weeks of training for this prep like magically started to fall together. So if I could put that together and start that kind of like as the base for the next couple of training blocks, it would put me in a really good spot in the spring, just in March. So for right now, I'm probably going to treat this next meet. I haven't decided if I'm going to treat it more like a training day or if I'm going to like legitimately taper for it or not. Because I don't know if this
just to
is
put them
a
on
meet.
notice.
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what the Arnold this year was supposed to be. And I I mean, I missed time pretty much my entire prep, I guess, for that one. But I had some pretty big numbers in mind for the Arnold. And the nationals, if I had hit that 198 squat, I think it might have set the tone for me to be able to do that. But I just kind of changed my mind. I was like, let's just secure what we can. Like, let's just build the resume, go home. Like, the numbers will be there when they're there. So we'll see. I'm really just trying to focus on March, even though I'm definitely still comparing international as well. But I have to actually get there first, so I can't jump the gun yet.
Yeah, I think we had a look at it. So I think if you were to get that last squat, it would have been around 535, which would have been third, I think, based off 535 from memory.
You might be right. However, I think next year, if Leah and Corolla both stay 69, because I know they're going 69 for Sheffield. If they stay 69, I think the winning total is likely going to be closer to 560. So that's something that I'm definitely keeping in mind, which is part of why I'm thinking maybe this next meet that I do to qualify for nationals might just be a training kind of day, just because I think I might need the extra time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna jump in here because there's an Instagram quote or a post that you said when you got your home gym, which I think is really powerful. And I want to kind of use this to segue off, just giving the listeners some inspo. So it goes, home gym isn't quite ready for use, but when I first stepped onto a platform for the first time in the spring of 2014, almost 10 years ago, I never would have thought I'd be where I am today. Professional powerlifters didn't exist in the US. I couldn't bench 135 pounds to save my life. Deadlifting 300 pounds is a lifetime goal. I was still playing softball, basketball, and volleyball, not to mention that I was just a kid with dreams of making it as an athlete, one way or another, whatever that meant. I'm still so far from the current goals that I have in the sport, but looking back at the last 9 years at this moment is everything. The next 9 years will be even better than the last. That I can promise. First of all, I love that. I think it's so good. I think it sums up like your story so well in terms of someone who's just been like purely dedicated to the sport of powerlifting. So I guess from that, what are some kind of key takeaways just to kind of start wrapping up in terms of what you can contribute to all your success over the last few years, and then what is going to keep contributing for decades and decades, which you've also said before?
So when you say like things that have contributed, immediately two things pop into my head. One, genetics. So thanks, mom and dad. And the second is probably the fact that I am neurodivergent. I think the way that my brain works, it allows me to be able to sustain a fixation. So I think most people who are as in love with a sport, they burn out really, really quickly and they kind of lose or they have to figure out their why. And I think for me, I don't actually have like an actual why. This is just something that is comfortable. And I think the fact that it is just something that I fit so well in when I don't fit really well into any other space, especially growing up, like this is just a space that I fit really well in. So I can't imagine ever completely leaving the space, whether it be as an athlete, coach, meet director, spotter, loader, whatever it is. I think the fact that I found a spot where I completely fit, I think that in and of itself, and I don't know if it is just a neurodivergent thing that I experience or if other people have experienced that as well, which is kind of the problem with being neurodivergent is I don't know exactly what is and what isn't. But if powerlifting is not a place where you feel like it's a spot where you fit and you have to change certain things about yourself in order to fit into that space, I think that's going to probably be the number one tell if you're going to be in the sport long term or not. So if it is a spot where you feel like you just fit in and it's just a comfortable spot for you to hang out in, then I think that's probably right where you need to be. And it's really easy to just stick with it for forever, even if you don't necessarily have a why. As long as you fit in and you feel comfortable with it, I think it's really easy to just keep going.
Yeah, that's definitely a theme that we hear a lot in terms of like that, just keep going. And like, I guess finding something where it is easy to stick to, right? Because that's what's going to help you stick in the gym on your good days and bad days, right? Like, obviously having that why in terms of why you're doing the sport can be that big backbone in terms of, keeping motivation high long term. But I think that was a really good point in terms of finding powerlifting as something that just fits for you, so it can be comfortable. And then that's obviously what's going to be something that, can just provide longevity in the sport long term.
Just sustain for life.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Most people that have fixations, like, they tend to get really, really into some of the things. And I think people that truly enjoy powerlifting, who have been in the sport for, decades, like, they're those people that, I enjoy talking to, because if anybody brings up lifting around me at work, at home, like, it's going to go on, and I'm going to talk about, like, the IPF and the USAPL and the split, and, like, what these totals mean, and, like, who Taylor Atwood is, and it's just going to go on and on. But in powerlifting, if that happens, like, both people are super excited about it, which is really cool too.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, yeah, it was so awesome to share that your story and all of that knowledge with us. And thanks again for coming on. We wish you all the best with future training, managing those niggles that you got hanging around. Bench depth, get that sorted. Big battle in March, and then we look forward to seeing what the future holds for you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Gabby.